I thank the distinguished chair of the IP subcommittee and all of the witnesses for your presence here today. It seems when you address this diversity challenge that we're confronting in the STEM industry that there's a recruitment issue that is problematic that many of you have spoken to, but there's also a retention issue. And if you solve the recruitment issue but don't deal with the retention issue, at the end of the day, you haven't really meaningfully addressed the problem. And, maybe starting with Professor Cook, but I'd be interested in everyone's perspective. What are some of the retention challenges that people of color and women face in the innovation economy?
So thank you for your question. I think that one of the things that is becoming more and more evident is that the climate in many of these patenting firms is not what it should be, and because they're demonstrating, because there are workers from these companies demonstrating, we should listen to them, and if you can do anything, have any sway over, say, the EEOC pursuing these claims, I think that would make a big difference. There has to be some outside force because they have not been able to police themselves in this way. We can make the argument, I can go to these firms and talk about the money that's being left on the table because patent teams are single sex rather than co-ed. I can talk about that. I make the profit maximization argument. But I think, on the other hand, there has to be enforcement, EEOC enforcement, and there seem to be a lot of things going on that need a watchful eye.
Director Lee, can you comment on sort of the culture at these institutions that may be impacting the ability to retain talented women and or people of color?
Yeah, I mean, it's hard when you don't see people who look like you. And it's hard when they don't look like you in more ways than one. So to the extent, now that shouldn't stop us from inspiring those underrepresented minorities to pursue these fields, but greater networks, greater support, greater retention efforts, greater consciousness, measuring the data, focusing on areas that need improvement. It should be within the priorities of a business to want to have these diverse teams because, as Professor Cook says, diverse teams, if you're thinking about creating something innovative that's never been done before, you get the greatest innovation, and studies have been done on this with people with different perspectives who don't look at the problem the same way.
Ms. Armstrong?
Being from one of these companies who struggles, frankly, to not only recruit but to maintain a diverse workforce, there's a lot of challenges that have been talked about here as well. And one of them, frankly, is how do you create the snowball effect? When I was always the only woman in the room, especially when you work overseas, and how do you create an environment where, especially some of the younger people want to work in. People want to work in an environment where they see a diverse team or a set of people that look like them as well. And so, it's very hard to come up with a set of magic bullets, but there's a number of things that we're working on. Implicit bias does exist. I'm sure it exists in all of us. So we're trying to engineer that bias out of our systems, out of our review systems, and out of our project rotation systems. And then certainly recruiting and also trying to show that Qualcomm and semiconductor and wireless technology is a really wonderful place to have a career, but it's a challenge.
Well, thank you. And Professor Howard, if you can just comment briefly in connection with your testimony about sort of the high cost of obtaining a patent and that as a barrier to entry for greater levels of diverse participation. I think you've spoken of sort of the patent fees as well as the cost of representation as challenges that people face, women or people of color.
Yeah, so the patent fees themselves, I wouldn't claim is as much of a challenge, but is basically prosecuting, i.e. doing the dance with the patent examiner to finally get the patent issued. That's really the problem. that's the majority of the problem. And if you're a small business, especially women are underrepresented, every single dollar you have is primarily so that you can support the business, especially since angel and VC is not as on par with other groups.
Well, thank you. And Mr. Chairman, hopefully that's one of the things that we can examine moving forward in terms of barriers to entry, and I yield back.